What we're talking about today is like ADHD traits and then like the need to know. And I know that, I've been doing these calls for 2 years, except for on Christmas Day, 1 year. Every other week we've hit. And I did a lot of the foundational pieces in the beginning, and I haven't done it for a new round of people that are on the calls. So it's also, if you've been on these calls for 2 years, you're also going to get new stuff. You know me. I'm not going to recycle old stuff because I like to keep it fresh, right? We like newness. And we are going to talk about like the traits. And even if you've been on these for a long time, I'm going to go over some of the lesser known traits that you probably don't know are ADHD, which for me personally and for coaching clients that I've worked with is really validating, and then just some of the difference between men and women, which is a really interesting conversation as well. And so it's going to be a really cool call. And if you haven't been on these in a while, we've moved these to 30 minutes instead of an hour to make them more concise for you because we have our group program now, which is ADHD Agents, or you could go to ADHDtyler.com if you want to do our group coaching. So ADHD, the basics of this, if one thing that's really important to know is this is like a brain structure thing. This is your brain structure. This is not with ADHD. It's not something that you can just try harder. You can just focus harder and try your way out of having ADHD, which I personally wouldn't want to. Like once you learn about ADHD and how to work with it, it's such a cool thing. I just it's such a beautiful thing. And there's a genetic component to why this exists, and I'm going to talk about that in a second because it's one of my favorite studies that they did. But ADHD, there's four parts of the brain that develop differently in utero. Almost 90% of cases of ADHD are genetic. And so you have a 50% chance of a parent having ADHD if you have it. And you also have a 50% chance of your offspring, your kid, having ADHD if you have it. So it's genetic. It's not all of a sudden being like overly diagnosed, like you can see in some of the headlines. It's actually underdiagnosed. About 80% of people with ADHD are undiagnosed still. And that is why I do this, because if you don't have the name for ADHD, right, you think you're lazy, you think you forget stuff, it's not a priority, you're procrastinator, all this stuff, instead of like, oh, my brain works differently, right? And I'm trying to do this in a neurotypical non ADHD way, which is great for people who don't have ADHD, and which is why it feels hard for me because I'm this beautiful fish trying to climb a tree instead of jumping in the water and gliding all over the place and really embracing my brain. So that's why I do what I do. And so I'm going to start with, why does ADHD exist? This is my favorite study they did. And that's going to give you an insight into why we're like this, because there's a genetic advantage. Like there's a purpose to this, right? And then we're going to get into some of the some of the common traits, and then the lesser known ones. And I bet for most, if not all people, there's going to be something on this list about you that you'll say, oh my gosh, I didn't know that was part of ADHD. And so that's going to be fun. And then I'll go into the men versus women and how that shows up because that's fascinating as well. So, why does ADHD exist? They studied remote villages in Africa, right? Because it's genetic. And so, what they were able to do is they were able to take these remote villages in Africa, and some had a prevalence of ADHD because it's genetic, and then other villages had no ADHD, right? Because they're contained. And the ones that did have ADHD did so much better. They thrived over the villages that had no ADHD. Like our brains actually help villages thrive. And what the roles that those people who had ADHD in the village were typically hunters. We also have 10 times the amount of thoughts as someone without ADHD. We're very creative. And so they could be inventors, they could be figuring out how to preserve food, really great intuitive with social structures and like connection and picking up on things. And so we were the hunters, right? That would go, and this is going to lead us into some of our traits. So time blindness, we see time differently. We see time as now or not now. That's one of the traits for ADHD. And we look at time in a completely, our brain, literally brain processes time differently. And we're not able to gauge how long it's been or how long something's going to take in the same way as someone without ADHD. However, we're very present because time is now, right? Time feels like right now. And so we can be hyper present, which is this beautiful gift. And so when you're a hunter, you need to be present. You need to be super present and completely in the moment and in the flow, right? Or you're going to be killed by a lion, right? And then also we have lower proprioception levels. So we might not pick up on cues when we're tired, hungry, thirsty, our feet hurt, like all of those things. We're not even thinking about that. We're hyper focused, right? That's that hyper focus ability. And then also we have delayed circadian rhythms. And so we typically, not everybody, But I think it's around 80% of people with ADHD have about a 2 hour delay on their circadian rhythm. So we're going to get tired a little bit later. So if you're somebody that is more of a night owl, or you have trouble going to bed really early or getting up early, have struggle in the mornings, that makes sense, right? We would stay up and watch for danger, and pick up on stuff. And then our impulse control is actually weakened. We have lower impulse control. However, there's a benefit to that, right? So if you're out hunting, if you have impulse control, there's a process that happens before you do something. And when you need to react very quickly because you're hunting a lion or something's coming at you, you can't think, you don't need to think, you just need to go and do, right? So we actually want lower impulse control because it could keep us alive. It could make us make a second decision. The other thing is a really cool study. They've tied weaker impulse control to stronger creativity. Right? Think about it. If you're constantly controlling your impulses all the time, you're not going to create. Think of like the painters we've had or musicians. If you're overthinking like everything that you do with like every stroke of your brush and every note that you play, you're not going to be able to flow in the same way. And so that lack of impulse control, there's actually a purpose for that. And we're less risk averse. And so someone else is going to be freaked out because they're hunting lions and they could die. And our dopamine levels are actually lower, which is why sometimes we have trouble with motivation, getting tasks done, all of those things. Our dopamine's lower. But when we're in high pressure situations, like if you leave something to the last minute, then it creates more dopamine and then we're at baseline and then we can do it. So it's not that you're procrastinating, you're lazy or whatever, you don't have dopamine. And so because our dopamine levels are lower and we do something high stress, which is why you're probably still in real estate, why a lot of people get out of real estate because it's too stressful, they can't handle it. The reason you're still in it is because your dopamine actually goes to baseline instead of spiking, because too much dopamine is too much. It creates massive anxiety, you can't slow down. Oh my gosh, like all this stuff. And so somebody who does not have ADHD and they're out hunting lions, their dopamine spikes. It's way too much. They do get spooked and then they can't do it. Right. So we actually get calm. If you're somebody that gets calm and stress, or like if there's a car crash or somebody's in like a chaos mode or trauma and you actually get calm, that's your dopamine actually leveling out. Right. So we would go hunt the lion, we'd go for days, we'd get hyper focused, we'd bring it back to the village, we'd figure out how to preserve it, we'd watch for danger. Right. This is why the village thrive, right? And that's why we have, yeah, somebody commented they had ER, right? Like brain, yeah. Oh wait, when the trauma came in, yeah, right. Like we get calm. That's why we have surgeons, like emergency care workers. We have performers. A lot of celebrities have it, like Justin Bieber has ADHD, Michael Jordan, right? Famous athletes. All these people, we do well under pressure. There is a reason for this. Inventors, I mean, Walt Disney had ADHD. That's one of my favorite. The inventor of the light bulb, the inventor of the telephone, like all of these things. These are ADHD brains that have shaped our culture. And because we're the minority, which is like, 2 to 3 to 10%, depending on which study you read, the world is built for a neurotypical brain, not an ADHD brain, a non-ADHD brain. So then we go out in the world and we take this lion hunter that's done these incredible things and is built for this, and then we say, okay, sit down, right, and answer these emails that aren't that urgent but are good, but you got to make a lot of decisions around it, and be calm and stay focused and do this every day at the same time, the exact same way, even if you don't want to do it. Like we're gonna struggle, right? Like if you struggled in school, like duh, right? We're meant for something higher pressure. And so that's why a lot of us can also have like self-worth stuff or self-esteem stuff. And it's not because something's wrong with us, it's because we are wired very differently. And yet we've been planted in a society that's built for a non-ADHD brain, which makes sense because the majority doesn't have ADHD. Like, of course, you're going to build a society around the majority. And so that's why it's so important to validate yourself and understand how your brain works. So then you're not shaming yourself for not that the way you've been taught to not work, right? Because it's not going to. We're wired differently. That do it the same thing. I'm going to put out a reel later today about my workouts and stuff, but I'm not waking up at 5 a.m. and doing the same routine and all that stuff every day. I would rebel. It's too rigid, right? Like, and so it's okay to do it your way. And so just know that there's a reason you're like this, and yes, it can feel debilitating. And yes, I mean, there are things that can be hard about ADHD, and it's really important to validate those. Um, and then also recognize the really cool things about it. So it can be both, and you can define whatever that means. If it feels more like a disorder to you and that feels really helpful, then you can totally look at it that way. If it feels more like a superpower, look at it that way, or you can hold both. I look at it both. I think in some ways it can be debilitating for me, in other ways it's really amazing. And looking at both sides and affirming both and getting tools in place for the debilitating parts that feel really hard, and then embracing the strengths is why I'm able to do what I'm able to do. And it's not pretending I don't have it. That doesn't work. Like having a name for stuff is really important. Yeah, about 3 to 10% of people who have ADHD, 80% are undiagnosed. And we have this abundance of thoughts, right? So there's three main types of ADHD. We have the hyperactive type, which is going to be more like the outward, right? The restless, can't sit still, can't relax, more impatient. You're going to see someone like tapping their foot, clicking their pen, something like that. And then we have the inattentive type, which is, instead of that outward presentation, you're going to all that chatter is going to be inside, right? So it's going to look different. It's not going to be the stereotypical. And I guess I'll probably go into the men and women with the hyperactive and inattentive. Now that I'm talking out loud, that makes way more sense. So the hyperactive type is more common in men, and the inattentive type is more common in women. But it doesn't mean that you can't be a man without and not have inattentive. I've done 10,000 one-on-one coaching calls at this point with ADHD adults, almost all of them in real estate, and I've coached hyperactive type women and I've coached inattentive type men. So the inattentive type, and by the way, the third type is a combined type of both. And most people, over 75%, have a combination of both. So you might have a ratio like I'm about 75% hyperactive, about 25% inattentive. So you're probably going to have a mix of both, most likely. Again, some of this research is really new and it's always evolving. So the ratio of how much you have is still undecided. But the hyperactive type, right, you're going to see that outside: impulse control, restless. Inattentive type, body's calm, but you might have this internal chatter that never quiets. A lot of times, especially with women, it gets misdiagnosed as anxiety or depression. If it gets overthinking, or bipolar, it gets misdiagnosed as bipolar for sure. You might forget details, have trouble staying focused. You might have some messy spaces or problems organizing, brain fog, memory issues, trouble managing time. You lose things, you lose your keys, you can't find stuff, all of that stuff. So that can be a little bit more of the inattentive type. So kind of think of the hyperactive type more as like the body, like outwardly, and then like external. And then the inattentive type is a little bit more internal. And what like and this is, again, I'm not a doctor, right? So this is my special interest. I do have a mental health background. I have coached for, over 10,000 calls. And if there's something that doesn't resonate with you, just as I want to throw that out there, like nobody's always right all the time. So just if there's anything that doesn't fit, listen to that, because I'm going to go into some things that I've noticed and some things that I've researched about men and women, and they're still up for discussion. So that's my disclaimer around that. So with this, like, why are we doing this on the outside, right? Or why is this happening internally? So really, at the core of it, our brain is understimulated. It's understimulated, which is why we do so well as the lion hunter, right? And that's why we're wired for. So this is my theory, and I say to myself, is the hyper. These are both ways of stimulating our brain, right? So if it's a hyperactive type, because the brain's trying to regulate itself. So if you're fidgety and restless, your brain is trying to help you. If you're overthinking or you have negative thoughts that are creating cortisol and endorphins and stress hormones, and it's creating dopamine, negative thoughts are compelling, right? It's engaging, it's stimulating for your brain. So both of these are ways that your brain is trying to stimulate itself to then create enough dopamine to do what you need to do. So the external presentation of the hyperactive type is restless, it's fidgeting, it's moving, right? And it's engaging the brain and it's stimulating. The inattentive type, which is more heady and more thought based, what that's doing, it's creating all these thoughts and all these compelling thoughts that might even be distressing, and endorphins and stress, because what that's doing is it's stimulating your brain. And when our brain is understimulated, this is when we have more trouble with procrastination or executive dysfunction, right? And also like We might have trouble regulating our emotions, right? Or remembering stuff. Like all of the dopamine runs a lot, and there's other neurochemicals involved, like norepinephrine and serotonin, all these stuff. So um, that's the way that I think of it. Is like if I'm really fidgety and restless, a lot of times we get reprimanded for that. And now with that understanding, because I was like, man, why can't I sit still? Why do I always sit in the back of meetings? Why do I always have to get up and walk a little bit? My brain's trying to help me. Like my brain's trying to help me. So then that kind of leads me a little bit more into the men versus women. And Stephanie already commented on that, is that the social expectations, right? And so there are people that are truly inattentive and there are people that are truly hyperactive. I believe that. And I've coached men that have the inattentive type, and it's not from societal stuff, right? And there's women that are hyperactive. And I mean, there's a lot of studies around this and it's still undecided. I think that there are some of us that lean more towards what's appropriate for our gender, potentially like the cues, not appropriate for our gender. Because if you think of it like in grade school, right? Let's say second grade. Picture kids in second grade. If you have two kids and they are all over the place and they're like rough housing and they're jumping up and down on their desk and they can't sit still, and one's a boy and one's a girl, which one is going to get more grace? Right? The boy's going to get more grace. Which one is going to get reprimanded sooner? Which one's going to seem out of place? Like for a stereotypical, rules for a boy, it's like, oh, boys will be boys. We still have that some in our culture. Whereas a girl, it's like, oh gosh, like something's wrong with her. Why is she jumping on the desk? Like we got to figure that out, right? So, if you have the more hyperactive type as a girl, you're probably going to find other ways. Like if you truly have the hyperactive type, you're probably going to find ways to get more in your head because you have to stimulate your brain, right? And if your natural inclination is to jump on the desk and like express that outwardly physically to regulate your brain, and that is reprimanded so strongly, you're just going to have to live in your head, right? There's no other way to do it, or you get punished. And so I mean, from what I've read, and again, this is why I did the disclaimer, because this is a theory, and there's still a lot of theories because there's still not a lot of research about it, is that there are definitely truly hyperactive and inattentive people. And I don't think personally that there is a huge difference between how the hyperactive manifests in a man and a woman because of brain structure. I think it's societal. That's my theory. And again, there's not a clear study that really can point to this in the same way. There's a lot of theories. So take that with a grain of salt. But I think that, if a woman has hyperactive and it presents differently than a man, for the most part, it's because there might be certain things that are okay and not okay. And then same thing with a guy. There are different pressure on that. If a guy's more in his head and he's more quiet or maybe more emotional, that can get reprimanded too. And so you have to take that into consideration. But as in like the brain structure, like the amygdala is a very similar size in a man and woman. The prefrontal cortex is a similar size, and so those are some of the main parts that are affected by ADHD in different sizes. And I haven't learned that there's a different size between men and women. And so when we are looking at how it manifests in women, that's a really important thing to take into consideration, was those social cues and the development. How were your parents? Were they, that kind of stuff. And then it can turn the volume up in women if with hormones. That can happen, right? A lot of women don't get that, if they get diagnosed. A lot don't get diagnosed, but if they do, there's two times that usually is, and it's usually mid 30s, and it's with hormones. So it could be premenopause, or it could be if a kid gets diagnosed. That's typically when a female gets diagnosed. Is those two times, and it's mid 30s, right? When on the average age that they get diagnosed, which is insane to me. And so having different expectations, you may feel like you're failing, right? And this could be men too. If you get a late diagnosis, you have all these years of thinking something might be wrong with you, right? Or why can't I do this? Or why is it easier for everybody else? Those kinds of things. And so it's interesting. And there's certain things that might be more rewarded, right? Like empathy, people pleasing might manifest a little bit more in women, which is part of ADHD, depending on the social conditioning. And then like as men, we might get more rewarded for risk taking, sometimes in business or being more firm or things like that. So it just, again, it depends. And then, sometimes like self doubt and imposter syndrome, especially if you have a late diagnosis for both. that can really creep in. So that's my theory. Again, I'm not the end all be all, but from what I've read, it's not like, ooh, ADHD shows up like this in men and ADHD shows up like this in women. That is not what I've perceived from my personal experience and research. So again, there's a lot of discrepancies, but yeah, but again, it is more common for women to have the inattentive type and men to have the hyperactive type, but it's not exclusive. So when we look at the traits of both, here are some ones that you may not know, and I want to go into these next. So time blindness, we talked about that. So if you haven't heard about that, right, it's difficulty sensing how long things take. We might over underestimate, we might underestimate. Like I have time blindness. Oh my gosh, which I'm super present. And I played semi pro in college soccer and I was a dual sport athlete in D1. College athletics, and I would get so focused and so present and so in the flow in the zone, and it was great, right? And I can be late and I have to work really hard not to be late because what our brain does and mind does, if you relate to this, is that I will think, okay, I'm meeting them at 5 and it takes me about 10 minutes to get ready and about 15 minutes to get there. So as long as I start getting ready about 4:15 and leave by this time, I'll be fine. Well, I don't think about traffic. I don't think about, oh my gosh, I forgot the laundry's not finished and I have to dry my shirt. I forgot I got to feed the dogs before, like, or I might even just say, oh my gosh, it's going to take double that, right? Like I didn't think about all this extra stuff. And so we can even try really, really hard and still be late sometimes because our brain it's almost like the gauge is kind of a little bit off. And so one of the things that I've done, it's like one of the only things is just accept that I have trouble gauging how long it takes and I have to double the time I think. And that is a rule that's I learned that in coaching myself and it's been really helpful. So double the time you think it takes to get ready for something, and then that if you have trouble being late. So time blindness, having trouble gauging time, object and permanent issues. This is one that a lot of people don't know about. So out of sight, out of mind with tasks, bills, food in the fridge. If it's not visual, we forget it exists. It can even happen with people. Object and permanence can even happen with people. So we might have somebody we really love or a good friend, and then we just forget for a month. And it does not mean we don't care. If we saw them, oh my gosh, we give them a big hug. It's just our minds sometimes are really so present and so in the now, and our working memory function a little bit differently. So it doesn't mean we don't care. It's just out of sight, out of mind, and we're so focused in the moment. Event amnesia, we might forget we already told someone a story, forget a conversation happened entirely. We can definitely have like a difference in working memory. Some people I've worked with thought they were getting dementia, and that's not true. So remember, ADHD is not progressive; it does not get worse. So if your memory is getting worse and worse and worse and worse, then maybe you want to look at that. But it could be hormones too. It could be stress. It could be trauma coming up. And so if you've had a poor memory, but you've had it your whole life, if it's not progressing and getting worse, it could just be ADHD, right? And there was I think it was Cambridge. I need to look at the study, but I read this incredible study where um, they found that people with weaker working memories, because our other type of memory, our more long term memory, is not impaired. It's actually the same as someone without ADHD, but it's our working memory, right? Our more short term or sometimes like holding things. So a weaker working memory was actually associated with intelligence because of how our brain prunes, where we prune, get rid of the stuff that's not urgent or not important, and we pick up the stuff that really matters because our brain can only hold a certain amount of data. So it actually was correlated with intelligence. Just FYI, which surprise, Albert Einstein, the smartest person to ever live, had ADHD. So if you ever feel dumb or you feel like you miss stuff, well, your brain works differently and you have the same diagnosis as the smartest man to ever live, like ever. So he also had autism and dyslexia. So learning disabilities are another part of ADHD. Dyscalculia, dyslexia, dysgraphia, so trouble with gauging like numbers, right? Math can be really hard. It's like almost like dyslexia, but for math. I don't have it, so that's what I've read. Dysgraphia. You might have other types of learning disabilities. emotional and physical sensitivities, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, like extreme emotional pain from real or perceived rejection. This isn't just fear of rejection. This actually, on studies show, brain scans show emotional pain at the thought or perceived rejection, even if it's not full out. So if you have trouble calling, figure out what the trigger is for this response. It's not just forcing yourself, because it can actually be kind of traumatic. Because again, it's a different wiring system. We can have sudden intense sadness, anger, joy. It can come in really quick, really, really strong, and then pass as well. So, emotional flash storms is what they call them. You can have big waves of emotions. Sensory sensitivities, tags in your shirts. I can't do them. You can notice I don't have tags, they'll drive me nuts. Certain sounds, smells, perfumes, textures can just feel intolerable, certain sensory stuff. And then emotional hangovers, so exhaustion after social events, to like feeling so overstimulated. So you might have a great day where you're, and then the next day you're just in bed. You can't get out of bed. Like you're just exhausted. So that could happen as well. The next one is energy and motivation paradoxes. So task paralysis, not laziness. Right? We can feel stuck even on simple steps. So we have trouble prioritizing. We might see all the steps at once and have trouble deciding what could be what. And so we just, it's like too many tabs open on the computer and then the whole thing freezes and shuts down. Interest-based nervous system. So remember this, and this is, we as ADHD, we have an interest-based nervous system. So sometimes we have trouble engaging unless it's interesting to us, it's new, it's urgent, it's a passion, right? If there's not accountability, if there's not pressure, um, like all of those things, and it's because those things create dopamine, and it takes dopamine to focus on something, right? So we have an interest-based nervous system. It's not selfish if you want to watch the thing you want to watch, or you want to do the thing you want to do, and not this thing that's boring, because it can literally hurt if we do something that creates no dopamine, because it sinks, and then we can actually like get depressed, we can get anxiety, we get dysregulated if something is of no interest and creates no chemicals in our brain. Hyper focus, sometimes it's we can't pull ourselves out. So sometimes we're locked on, it's amazing. Sometimes we want to quit, and it's like we can't put it down, we can't stop. So that hyper focus is amazing. And then sometimes we just lock on too long, forever. That's me in Canva designing graphics or other things I'm doing. Sudden energy crashes. So you could be totally on it, and I'm going to organize my whole closet and get everything out. And then all of a sudden, crash, gone. You can't do it. You have no energy and you're just drained without warning. And it could be like that. So you can have these sudden energy crashes that happen, and you're like, where did the motivation go? I was motivated like 2 minutes ago, and then it's just gone, and then you got to go do something else. Sleep. So delayed sleep phase, right? So naturally, for a lot of us, our body wants to stay up later. Mornings can be really, really hard, depending on the person. You can have delayed circadian rhythm. Sometimes we can have very vivid dreams. Maybe your brain doesn't shut off, especially if you have the more inattentive type, which is the one more common in women, right? Which is a little bit more heady, like more thought based than like external. So your mind just doesn't shut off. Sometimes that can flow into your dreams. And then temperature regulation issues, running too hot or too cold. It can actually be linked to our nervous system differences. So this is not just a brain thing. It's just not a thought thing. This is literally our biology. And that being said, speaking of our nervous system, we can have more likely to have like hypermobility, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, POTS, histamine intolerance, mast cell activation syndrome. There are things that are different about our biology, and this is the new research is showing that there are certain autoimmune diseases we're more likely to have. I have like gluten intolerance. I have histamine or mast cell activation syndrome, where there's certain foods that give me a low level allergic reaction that I didn't know about, and they're linking allergies to ADHD in some ways, because when we have an allergic reaction, it creates cortisol and endorphins, and that creates an immune response. And sometimes our bodies can like have trouble clearing that. And there's more to it. I'm going to do a little bit more into that. But they're finding endorphins and a lack of focus, or that immune response and a lack of focus is tied. And so there are a lot of us that can play with taking like an allergy med, and it actually helps focus because some of it's like an overactive immune response. So that's a whole other world I'm looking into. So there's stuff in our biology, in our connective tissue, right? Ehlers-Danlos, hypermobility, nutritional deficiencies like low vitamin D levels, low vitamin B12, all of these things that are tied to our entire biology, not just our brains. And that's why it's so silly when there's a stigma like just try harder or focus. It's like, no, buddy, my entire system is designed differently in so many different ways. And then, so communication and social cues, info dumping, right? A tidal wave of thoughts when they're excited. Hey, you're looking at it right now. This is my special interest, right? Conversational ping pong, jumping from topics fast. And depending on the listener, this is masking, right? So when I'm with you guys, I can talk fast. If I go speak at an office and the majority don't have ADHD, which a lot of people in real estate haven't, I have to talk slower and more methodical, or it's too much for them. They can't keep up because our brains process so quickly. So quickly. We have 10 times the amount of thoughts as someone without ADHD. 10 times the amount of thoughts. And so, me talking fast, if I didn't talk fast, you'd probably get bored. Whereas other people, it's like, oh, this is great. Let me take notes, which is why a lot of us can play music or not music. That would be kind of crazy. But like books on tape or YouTube videos, they turn the speed up to like 2 to 3 times sometimes, or 1.5 times, and then we can actually focus. So if you have trouble listening to books on tape or YouTube videos or whatever, turn the speed up and see if it's easier because your brain is understimulated and it's built to process things faster. Over explaining, we can over explain. It's really driven by a fear of being misunderstood, right? We can be misunderstood, especially if you're on the autism spectrum. So we can over explain a lot. We can also mirror. So some of these are kind of masking. So we unconsciously copy other people's mannerisms or language to fit in, especially if you have a wound of not feeling like you fit in, or rejection, or not being understood, or late diagnosis. So mirroring other people. And then we go into decision making and risk. So analysis paralysis, we can be stuck on choosing equal options. What email subject to put in our thing? What drip program should we do? What should I name my social media video? What's the script? Like, we can get so stuck. How should I design my signs? What's my branding? We can be stuck for like months on that stuff. And it's because we have so many options and trouble sometimes prioritizing. Impulse spending, if you are, and eating too. So a lot of times we could be chasing dopamine or novelty. With that, our brain's trying to regulate. So if you have spent an exorbitant amount of money, if you are binge eating or snacking, that is your brain a lot of times trying to self-soothe. So if you can let go of the guilt or the shame around that, and then figure out what your brain is needing when that's happening, that is going to be such a better caring way to address that than discipline or beating yourself up for spending too much money. Like, we want to figure out what is the need you're trying to fill, and what's another way you can give that self to you, versus like, don't spend, be disciplined. Like, I don't know about you, but that doesn't work for me. So instead of just being tough on yourself, right? Because if being tough would have worked, it would have worked by now. So instead, what do you need? What are you trying to do? Are you numbing out emotions? Are you bored? Are you feeling understimulated? Like, do you need something new? Like, what are you trying to do? And that's where you get to the root of those habits and can shift those. And that's happened in coaching. We've done that before. Risk seeking. So leaning into high reward fast decisions others might not do, right? We can be a bit impulsive, we can do high risk stuff. Sometimes it pays off, sometimes it doesn't. I like to think overall, as long as it's a little calculated, it does pay off. So yeah, we can seek high risk stuff. There's also, just, I'm gonna say this, like, we can, the sex addiction is a little bit more common, right? Things that create dopamine, that is something that can be prevalent. I've seen that as well. So all of this stuff is really normal. And then, just, we talked about the physical, right, with the autoimmune. So clumsiness, walking into door frames, dropping things. Like, if you walk around and you catch yourself on the corner all the time, or the doorknob, like, that's our lower proprioception that we talked about, not picking up when we're hungry, tired, thirsty. And that can account for like missing stuff, or just not being as aware of like where things are around us, unless it's a lion that we're hunting, right? Like the hunter, or really urgent. Um, ADHD walks. Anybody, when they talk on the phone, walk around or circle or pace? right? It's helping you engage. Your brain is keeping you engaged. It's all regulating. This is like your brain is good. And I want to make that really clear. These habits that maybe you don't like, or these traits, your brain is trying to help you. Your brain is your friend, and it's trying to keep you regulated. So even if you're doing risk seeking stuff, even if you're impulse spending, even if you're doing like, your brain is trying to find a way to keep it stimulated, because our brain is like especially the prefrontal cortex is responsible for regulating our emotions, for motivation, for keeping us going, like for feeding ourselves, for cooking, for doing our job. And so the brain at all costs is going to try to find ways to regulate your prefrontal cortex, because that's the thing that's making you do the things you need to do. And so having compassion and understanding when you're doing things that you don't want to be doing, and finding a different way to give your brain what it needs, like going for a walk or blasting music, or whatever sensory seeking stuff, that's where you see a change in those behaviors. It's not shaming yourself in pain. I don't like being motivated by pain. It's not fun. I want to be going towards what I do want versus not what I don't want. So I just want to throw that out there. Yeah, the ADHD walks, pacing, circling when we're on the phone, or brain stimming, tapping pens, bouncing your legs, fiddling with your jewelry, your hair, whatever that is, rocking back and forth, listening to the same song over and over again, watching the same shows over and over again. Like, stimming is this way that your brain is regulating. You might like skin pick. That could be stimming. It's all these ways that your brain's like finding some way to stimulate itself. And sometimes they're helpful and sometimes they're not helpful. You might take a pen apart, you might crunch up a piece of paper. Eating is stimming, right? If you're overeating, your brain might be trying to stim, which stimming creates like little low levels of dopamine, and it's like trying to feed you, right? So think of, if you have habits that you don't love and you don't know why you do them, a good thing, especially if you know you have ADHD, is to think, I wonder if this is stimming. I wonder what this is serving me, instead of I'm bad, I'm doing this, I need to be disciplined. It's like, what purpose is this serving? Because you wouldn't be doing it if it didn't have a purpose. So what do you need, and if you want to replace it, what do you want to replace it with? So stimming is a big thing there. And stimming could be singing the same song over and over and over in your head, even if you don't like it, right? Like a jingle in your head. And then identity and self perception. And this is my end of the list of some of the stuff. So chronic guilt and shame. This is a big one. Chronic guilt and shame. And then I'm going to end this with like some of the benefits in real estate. So we end it with a fun thing. So chronic guilt and shame. We've internalized years of maybe not living up to your potential. Why'd you forget that? It's just like, again, as a kid, we get 20,000 more negative messages about our behavior by the age of 8 with ADHD. So already an 8-year-old kid is hearing 20,000 more times than their non ADHD peer. Why did you do it this way? Why did you forget this? Why can't you sit still? Why didn't like, oh, you need to calm yourself, like all this stuff, right? So that is like, right, we're going to have shame, especially if you haven't had a label for what you're experiencing. And then imposter syndrome, this is a huge one, right? Success can feel like luck. Failure just shows, oh, I can't do this, right? So imposter syndrome, maybe I don't deserve this. All that kind of, maybe they're going to find me out. Especially if you've internalized that shame. I had this forever, where I thought if somebody really like knew me, if they got really, really close to me, they wouldn't like me. Like they would think, and this is, more people have this than you realize. And I realized this coaching is, it all came down to like, I'm not good enough. I'm not enough. Something's wrong with me. I'm not as good as people think I am. And so I've worked through that. I don't believe that anymore. But I had that for years, that if people really knew who I was or how I lived, like I'm actually just imperfect and not good. And they think I'm this, but they're probably wrong. Like, so imposter syndrome is a big thing, which I don't experience. You can work through that. I'm telling you, you can get progress on a lot of this stuff and keep all the good stuff. And then perfectionist. This is another one. So, oh man, we can be perfectionists, right? And this could be a way to avoid reprimanding growing up. This could be because there's way too many options. We don't know what to do. This could be our all or nothing thinking. So that's the last one on this list, is this all or nothing, black and white thinking. And there's more. Like, there's a lot of stuff how that can show up, but this is just some, right, of these traits. But black and white thinking, all or nothing, especially if you have autism, rigid thinking, like I'm either all good or all bad. I either do this incredible brand and do this huge launch, or I'm not going to do it all, and until it's perfect, I'm not going to do it. So we stay stuck for months. Or I need to have this like perfect social media video, I'm not going to post it, right? If you think of this all or nothing, or I'm not going to be like I'm either going to crush my goals and have this huge goal, or I'm not going to set them at all. I'm going to either check my numbers every single day, or I'm not going to check them all. Like this kind of, if you think of it, it's a lot of times it's, the language always, never, every time, right? It's this like black and white. It's always this or it's not. And a lot of times there's two options. I either win or fail. It's either perfect or I'm not going to do it at all, or it's terrible, right? So this all or nothing thinking, extreme thinking. Now it's rigidity, right? And it can help us also, like, I'm going to do this amazing. And sometimes we do it amazing. It's incredible. And so having the awareness around the all or nothing thinking is helpful, because then you can choose, hey, I'm in all or nothing thinking. I'm going to embrace this. Or you know what? In this, I'm going to look for the gray and say, I'm going to go for good enough. I'm going to get this social media video out there. It's 85% good enough. I'm going to let it go. And it actually happens. Think of all the ideas we implemented on when they were 85% good enough, instead of letting them go to the graveyard and never happening. Think of all the ideas you have, or all the projects, or all the social media videos, or all the marketing. If you just did it good enough, right? If you just did it good enough, where your business would be. And so that's a practice of a tolerance, actually, that I work to build up to, is letting things go out when they're good enough, and not perfect. Sending the email when it's good enough, and it changed my whole business. So I encourage that for you. So I'm going to end this with the great ways it shows up in real estate. So high self-awareness. So these are some of the benefits. Really high level conversion rates, right? I did a stat comparison to when I worked with MAPS coaching with Calvin. Great coaching program. I'm on my own now though, and just will take clients sometimes. And I may open up another day. So shoot me a message if that's something you're interested in, because I think I've got 3 spots left. But anyways, with MAPS, they tracked numbers, and they found it took 121 like two-way conversations for one closing, right? 120 contacts for one closing. And then I tracked it with my clients who had ADHD, and it took them about 60 contacts for one closing. So this was over like a 6-year period, 5 or 6 years. So statistically, it took half the amount of contacts for the same amount of closings for an ADHD agent, right? Half the amount of activities for the same amount of closings as a non ADHD agent, because of what we pick up on, right? Our energy, our passion, our empathy, our intuitiveness. We can pick up on certain cues. We're very approachable. We're very likely not fake, right? We're very authentic. We have the abundance of thoughts, tons of ideas, fast talking, fast processing, great marketing, very creative, see things differently, hyper focus, right? We can lock in on stuff, super present on our appointments with people. They feel so heard. And this is, calm under pressure. This is part of my list, right? We're really good last minute, calm in chaos. We can handle growth. We're good in chaos. Other people freak out. We sit in it and we grow so fast. We're so curious. We're so learning based, right? Risk tolerance and courage, great entrepreneurs, authenticity, and just this like generosity and empathy, right? And just people can tell we really care. Next week, we're doing part 2 of medications, like the myths and the truths, because there's so much stigma out there. So that's going to be really fun. So that's what I have for you today. So if you want more, go to ADHDtyler.com, join our group coaching, and thank you for being here. This was so fun. So fun. All right. Have a great day, everybody. Take care, and we'll see you next week.